Once I came to understand the reality of the body's negative reaction to dieting, I made it my goal to develop a better method for achieving and maintaining a healthy weight, one that did not go against the natural protective instincts of my body and mind. Then I devised a system based on the results of my research, my work on myself, and my extensive sessions with my clients. My system helps people who have grown weary of unsuccessful dieting create a long-term, sustainable way to achieve their healthiest self. These are the words of Dr. Supatra Tovar, who is our guest today. She teaches clients how to use research-based techniques in behavioral psychology, nutritional science, and exercise kinesiology to reduce stress, stay focused, and overcome complex challenges. Dr. Tovar earned her doctorate degree in psychology from the California School of Professional Psychology and has 2 master's degrees, including a Master of Nutrition in Science. She is also a BASI certified Pilates instructor, reflecting over 20 years of dedication to integrating physical fitness with mental and nutritional health. All right, let's get to this episode of the Intentional Clinician podcast with Paul Krauss. Hello and welcome, Dr. Supatra Tovar, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul.
My pleasure. And today we are going to talk about your work, including your new book, Deprogram Diet Culture. Rethink your relationship with food, heal your mind, and live a diet-free life.
Yes, please. Let's talk about it.
Well, I'm up for it because my entire life, all I heard about on commercials and talk shows was dieting and how everyone needs to be on a diet. Whether it's now keto or this new caveman diet or cave person diet, the meat diet, vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, and then Atkins, a bunch of really weird ones in the early 80s where you were supposed to drink white wine and eat chicken every day or something weird. I saw that one in a weird book. I don't know what it was called. And so, in the U.S., people are obsessed with diets, and yet you are a clinical psychologist and a dietitian, and you're telling us to let's get out of this diet culture. Can you explain a little bit about why you decided that?
Well, diets fail. That's pretty categorical. About 95% of diets fail. They become unsustainable over time. They may yield some very short-term results, but don't yield lasting results. So I treat a lot of people who come in to me to work on disordered eating, whether that's just continuous cycles of dieting and failure, to all the way to full-blown eating disorders. And one of the main causes for all of these difficulties is dieting and what we're receiving as messaging and misinformation from diet culture. So, I mean, to have everyone stop dieting would be my greatest dream. To have them really realize that that is not the way to long-term sustainable weight, but most especially sustainable health. And when you look at it in the context of today's diets, the ones that are so high protein oriented, if we continue on this trajectory, which we have been, in terms of the amount, especially of animal protein that we consume, and we know the cost to the body of these types of diets and just the standard American diet alone, just standing alone, we're headed towards some pretty serious health complications. We're already in them, but I think it may get worse.
Well, you said that we know the costs of these high protein diets. For instance, the two that you kind of alluded to were the keto diet, which is like high protein, low carbs. Am I right about that?
Yes.
And then this sort of meat diet. I don't really know what you call it. Paleo. Wait, is that paleo?
There's paleo. There's the caveman diet.
The cave diet. Yeah. Where they just eat only meat. And you said we know the cost to the body. But my question is, if we do, then why are these folks going on podcasts and talking about how it changed their life and how they're like never felt better and all of this? Do they have a financial agenda? What do you think the costs are? Because you are a dietitian. Maybe you could explain a little bit of that.
Well, if you look just at Dr. Atkins himself, I mean, he was one of the kind of forerunners of the, high protein, low carb diet craze. He himself died of a heart attack.
I saw that.
So there's copious amounts of scientific evidence that proves that, or at least correlates highly, that a very high, animal protein and high saturated fat diet can lead to a host of health issues, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, even. That's a little known fact. For whatever reason, I can't understand why. From, having difficulties with overweight and obesity. There are so many health problems that come from having the largest proportion of your diet coming from protein, and most especially animal protein.
Yeah, so it sounds like the research is in. You studied this in school. You have a master's, I believe, in this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yes,
so
master's in nutritional science.
That's what I thought. Yeah, so then you know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. But yet these things are so trendy, and I wonder, as a therapist, if this is somewhat cultural, that in the United States culture, we are looking for something quick to fix our life and make our body look a certain way, or we feel a certain way, and we want it to be fast, and we want there to be a solution. Mm-hmm. Instead of maybe what I would call the old-fashioned day-by-day kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I don't want to put words in your mouth or anything, but what are your thoughts about the cultural idea of diets?
If you look at what drives dieting and diet culture, I can point to two very distinct biases. And the first one is lookism, which is the unhealthy pursuit of the thin ideal. And if you look at what the thin ideal is, especially, today, it's emaciation or extreme thinness. Mm. And so we have this drive to look like the celebrities and the models that we see on the big screen and, in fashion magazines. And that drive is what sends us towards dieting. But I think even worse as a bias, more insidious bias, is weightism or fat shaming and fat phobia. If you look at the proliferation of fat shaming and fat phobia in the world, it's more accepted, more widely used than racism or sexism. And so people are, being ridiculed and mocked for their weight. And so that, psychologically sends anyone who might fit into that category. And then most people in the United States, especially, 2 out of 3 are overweight, and there is a large proportion of people who, fit into the obese category. That kind of stigma against their weight and their shape really drives that desire for the quick fix. The quick fix is, and that's where diet culture makes a ton of their money, because they do offer these very short-term quick solutions. If you look at keto, yes, you're going to lose some weight in the beginning of this diet. And the reason you lose the weight is because you're drastically cutting your calories, first of all. Most people eat around 2,400 to 3,000 or more calories per day. And most diets, and keto is one of them, really want you to maintain a 1,200 calorie or less calorie intake in your day. And that's not even enough to fuel a toddler. So that's one reason. And really, when you look at that, when you do just drastically cut your calories, just alone like that, you will lose some weight. You will lose some weight, but you have to wonder, what kind of weight am I losing? Because what happens when you cut those calories is that your hunger hormones shoot up. Your ghrelin hormone shoots up because it's telling you, hello, I'm hungry. You're feeding me half of what I've had before. And so when you get half of what you've had before and you're not listening to ghrelin, eventually ghrelin will just kind of simmer in the background, and then your body goes into kind of an emergency mode, a starvation mode, because it's worried. And it's an evolutionary kind of process that we developed from way back in the times when it was really feast or famine, and mostly famine. And so your body will expel the weight that it can let go of easiest first, which is water. So you lose a lot of water first in the keto diet. And that's what gets people like really jazzed up. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm losing so much weight. Well, it's water weight. The next that will go will be muscle. And the last that will go will be fat. And that's all of these high protein diets, all of them. In addition to that, your body does not like the proportion to have so much animal protein. Your body runs primarily on carbohydrates, so it doesn't know what to do with all of these protein calories. Yes, some get excreted in your urine. Yes, some goes to muscle building, especially if you're, doing keto and you're losing a lot of muscle. But mostly what will happen is it'll go to fat. And when you look at this diet, the last thing that you're going to lose is fat. And you may, if you're on this diet for long enough, you may lose fat. But what happens is the body is keeping the score. It's remembering the proportions of what was lost in terms of muscle and fat. And so the minute you go off the diet, because it's like, oh, okay, we're safe now, we're not in emergency starvation mode, then you kick into this other biological process called compensatory hyperphagia, which is simply to make up for what was lost before you eat a lot. Compensatory, and hyper means lot, and phagia means eat. So you just eat a lot. And that's how your body then reclaims the calories that were lost. So you can see this with pretty much all diets, including the new weight loss medications as well. As soon as you go off of them, you regain the weight, if not more. So to me, completely pointless. Totally pointless to diet, because you just end up in this crazy hamster wheel. And then every time you fail, you think you fail, it's really the diet that's failing you. You think, well, there's got to be the next thing. There's got to be the next quick fix. And that's the problem.
Right. And so I've heard I never heard it called what you called it, compensatory hyperphagia. Right. I'd heard it called diet rebound. I guess that's layman's terms, but I didn't know it was an actual biological process. I thought it was just like people, perhaps becoming excited after getting off the diet and eating a bit too much because they have been depriving themselves. But it actually sounds like it's your body is evolutionarily attempting to restore homeostasis, which actually makes more sense to me based on the trauma-informed literature. You sort of use the body keeps the score, which I think is a huge landmark book. And I think a lot of the research has come off of, there are a lot of our modern trauma-informed perspectives have come from that book and things leading up to that book. So, this is, I have to say, your book sounds quite practical, but yet possibly countercultural because of the way things kind of go in the US, is that there's these fads that sort of spring up and then people get all into them. And then, they're maybe confirmatory bias of trying to make it work for them. If you commit and you say you're on the caveman diet and you tell all your friends, well, you certainly don't want to now have to go on your show and tell everybody that, ooh, I've kind of gained the weight back here, or my doctor's saying my LDL cholesterol is really high, and this sort of thing. So very strange. So I know there's obviously a lot of solutions, and you have kind of some steps in your book when I was looking through it, kind of getting down to small micro changes, I guess, to summarize what you were saying. And I don't want to give away the whole book because I do think people need to go through it. But what would you say? Obviously, dieting doesn't work because it's this extreme change. Your body's going to rebound in some way. What, without summarizing it too much or breaking it down too much, what would you say one of your favorite solutions is for people that are trying to become more healthy, maybe lose a little bit of weight?
Well, I think it is a little bit nuanced. Okay. It's not just like a one thing that they can do, but certainly the education that diets don't work is the first and primary lesson. If there's any way that you can just stop dieting and stop believing the lies that come from diet culture, that's the first step. The second step, I think, is reconnecting with your body. We often, especially out of diet culture, are told to ignore our body. Ignore when you're hungry. Just drink some water. You'll be fine, right? You hear all of these things like, eat this many calories, and your body's telling you, no, I need more. It's telling you I need other things. And you're like, no, but the diet's telling me I need this. I think it is of vital importance that we listen to our body. And you can go all the way back to childhood for that. Children are so good at listening to their bodies. And it wasn't until they got a lot of messaging from their families, from, society, that brought them out of their natural hunger and fullness cues. And if you can just tune into that, and I'll tell you, when my clients come in and this is what I present to them, it's almost like they've forgotten what actual hunger feels like. They know it, intellectually, but they've actually forgotten it because they eat situationally. They'll eat at certain times of day, even when they're hungry or they're not, or they'll eat mindlessly. They'll eat while they're distracted in front of the television and not even know when they've gone past fullness. So one of the major things that you can do, easiest things you can do, is truly tune into your body and just gain a little bit of self-awareness and ask yourself in that moment, what do I need? Not necessarily what do I want, but what does my body need right now? And then start to listen to how food sits inside of you. Because when you become really aware of this, you know that food that comes from close to the ground, that's giving you a lot of energy. That's giving you a lot of, your mind starts to clear, your depression and your anxiety start to lift when you're eating food that's closer to the ground. Whereas if you were eating something really highly processed, you might feel like you get this temporary high and then you kind of crash afterwards. When you really start to listen to your body, then you can discern. I also think it's super important that we stop vilifying food. We stop, and this is a hard one for a lot of people. They're like, no, there is good food and there is bad food, period, and end of story. There's highly processed food and then there's this. But because we vilify food and we make them good or bad, then we create psychological cravings for the bad food. And so when you don't have that as something that's off limits, when it is available to you as part of any dietary choice that you can have, you actually stop craving those foods more and more when they're not taboo, when they're not off limits. And I would love to just dispel the whole high protein, low carb myth. And it is a myth. Our bodies run primarily on carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, meaning fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans and legumes, any kind of starchy root vegetable or grain. Those are carbohydrates. And the glucose that comes from the breakdown of these carbohydrates are what goes into your cell to make ATP to create energy. A lot of people think that you might get energy from protein. You don't, unless it has to be converted. So that's really important information. So your body is craving them the majority of the time. In diet culture, you're told, don't listen to that. No, when you really listen to that and you tune in and you decide for yourself how these carbohydrates make you feel, then you can use yourself as a guide. And you would never need to listen to anyone ever again telling you what to eat and what not to eat.
Okay, yeah, those are some very important steps. I definitely think that tuning into your body could really make a difference. I think the hard part in culture and society that have sort of molded people's habits, or you said even growing up as a child, you're told when to eat and how much, right? A lot of people are. And there's a lot of parenting techniques of you've got to make sure that you finish everything on your plate, or you have to eat this, or you can't have this. And some of that's for the child's good, maybe to make sure they're eating vegetables, but there can also be some long-term unintended effects. And then how do we listen to our bodies when we're stressed out? I mean, at work or something, right? Like you said, mindless eating or something There's something that happens in office buildings. And I don't know if you've ever worked in a big office building with a lot of people, but people bring in really sugary treats
Mm-hmm.
a couple times a week, it seems. And I mean, that's nice, but also I'm like, like I'm falling into your good food, bad food trap right here. I'm like, what if we brought in bananas and apples? Would that be better for people? You know what I mean? It's more whole, like a whole food, like close to the ground food, like you said. But there's something to the group, like let's all eat this donut together, right? I mean, there's something to that human bonding. At the same time, donuts are not bad. It's just the frequency. Like if we ate donuts every day, you would say that maybe isn't that not a great idea, or what would you say to that?
Well, I think that when you listen to your body, you can have whatever you want. Your body just tells you when you are done. And that I think we're not encouraged to do because of that social conditioning. So what I encourage my clients to do is actually go back into their past and remember, or have their parents tell them what they were like, what kind of eater were they like when they were a child. And then to recall all of the messaging that they got from their childhood. When they can really understand their childhood relationship to food, then they can understand how their current relationship to foods, why it's the way it is. And oftentimes it stems from childhood. It also stems from our attachment to our caregivers and how food was presented, whether it was a comfort or maybe even something that you were bribed with or things like that, that all determine how we think about food. And so when we get to that realization of this is where I come from, and this is why I think this way, that's when you can really start challenging it. So the big part of my book uses CBT essentially to challenge some of the beliefs that we've received about ourselves, or that we've adopted about ourselves and about food. Because when you really challenge these thoughts, they're more often than not negative and incorrect. And when you can really examine them for evidence and evidence against, then you can formulate new thoughts about yourself and about food. I think the biggest one about food is that carbs are bad. And you can really delve into the evidence that carbs are not. However, some carbs, like a donut, will break down into glucose much faster than something like, a piece of whole grain bread. And so when you understand that difference, and you understand how food fuels your body or depletes your body, then you can make that informed choice. But having them be off limits, I don't think is realistic for anyone. And they're going to then, when they see those donuts in the office, they're going to be like, oh no, that's off limits. I'm not allowed to have that. And then they go and have it and they eat it, as fast as they can. And there's a whole guilt and shame spiral. But if you were really actually sitting with that donut and you were really, really present with it, and you took the time to eat it slowly, there would be a point where your body would be like, that was good. That's enough. And then you don't overindulge on anything. I mean, just yesterday, I had a huge plate of fried onion rings in front of me. Huge plate. And they're completely on the table. And I'm sorry, but I really love fried food. And I allow myself that. But I eat it slowly. And I actually taste it. And I then decide when I've had enough. And I've never had to worry, as I used to have to worry when I was dieting. When I was dieting, it would be so different. I would eat them, all in one go because I wasn't going to be able to have them again for a few more months. That's a whole different thing. And so your body then has time to process that food. It may not love it. I didn't feel the greatest after I ate it. It's not the same as when I have food that's close to the ground. But I think to dispel this notion that we have zero control over ourselves in the face of food, I think that's really disempowering. And I think, when you empower yourself to trust yourself around food, it's going to be a different story.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like changing your relationship, how you think about food, how you think about nutrition, how you think about fullness. And like you brought in mindfulness and CBT in that conversation about looking at your thoughts, but also mindfully eating, meaning that you were listening to your body, you were chewing the onion rings, you were just sort of feeling it instead of thinking like like you said, there wasn't the extreme thinking coming in. Like you said, when you're on a diet, like, oh, I need these. I'm never going to have these for months. I better eat too much, which is an extreme sort of reaction versus I'm going to have some. And now I feel kind of like I've had enough of these. Right.
Yes.
Which is sort of like giving yourself permission to trust yourself.
Yes.
I imagine this does take a decent amount of therapy or reading to kind of learn this, because you said there's multiple things here. There's the self. There is education about foods, education about, you said fuels or depletes. Talking about glucose. So it seems like if people learn about foods, it can make them less reactionary to the food. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, but I think most people have a pretty good understanding of what, kind of healthful foods are and less healthful foods. It is sort of complex, but can be broken down quite easily in terms of learning these things. In my book, I also have an online course, and I have an accompanying workbook. And if you purchase the book, you can then get the workbook for free from me if you just email me. So in that workbook, it takes you through exercises so that you can understand that. Like there's a hunger and fullness section. Then there's a hunger and fullness versus mindful and emotional eating section. You can really start to understand those moments when you're not actually hungry and how to provide yourself what you need in that moment when you're not hungry, but you want to go and eat. Then there's a whole section on, basically tracking for a couple days, when you eat, how much, what was your portion size, what were you feeling? What were you feeling during? What were you feeling after? How much did you eat? So that you're getting all of this information for yourself and you're relearning how to do this. So systematically, you can do this. And it's not like, it took you a whole lifetime to get here. It's not going to take a whole other lifetime to retune into your body. It just takes practice. So these worksheets are really helpful in, increasing your self-awareness and helping you to understand your body. And then there's also exercises on mindful eating, on helping to change your thoughts, and then how to create the behaviors that you want to keep to last for a lifetime. Once you go through these steps, then you have that self-awareness and you have all of the tools and you can apply them. And everyone that's come into my office for eating disorders or disordered eatings have resolved those issues just by doing this inner work for even a few months. Sometimes it takes a little longer because you've got a lot of influences that you have to really disseminate and really, take away from your life. But it doesn't take another lifetime to learn this and to have a sustainable way to having a healthy weight and a healthy body for the rest of your life.
Okay, yeah, it does sound like you've got a lot of solutions in the book and also an online program and a workbook, which people can get into. Your website and all of that will be in the show notes as well as the link to your book. I think that you've pretty much covered some of the questions I was going to ask just about, how do you do this? Well, obviously you have to do the work. You have to spend some time on it and you have to, worksheets, different learning, education, all these things. There's so many factors like your history, your emotions and food, all of these things you listed. I'm curious just because right now I feel like in the United States, we're having this sort of revolution about different things that were seen as quite normal recently are being upended, such as processed foods. There's a study that came out in the NIH, National Institute of Health, that said like high processed foods are linked to faster weight gain and possible chronic illnesses. And so I know that we don't want to label foods as good or bad, but part of my brain was like, okay, this is what I did. I like cookies and cakes, okay? But I know that if I make it myself, or if I go to a local bakery that makes them with basic like 6 ingredients, I'm probably eating a healthier version of of cakes or cookies than if I go to the gas station and buy this little piece of cake that has been wrapped up for, can last for 2 to 4 years on the shelf, because of all the extra ingredients they add to make it shelf stable and make it sustainable, and possibly in some theories make your body crave it more due to food science. So I wondered if you could kind of talk about that, because I do think that is a barrier or a difficulty for people even trying to do your program. Like, I want to learn about myself, but then every time I eat these blank cupcakes, I don't want to say the name in case I get sued. I need more of them immediately. And I feel horrible, but I still need it. Kind of like an alcohol craving. Could you kind of explain that?
Yes. Well, you're absolutely right in that food scientists, they're actually called craveability experts, which is kind of scary in my opinion. They do design and engineer food so that it's, highly palatable with lots of, sugar, salt, and fat. And they are designed, chemically modified to make you want and crave them more. And I think it is really important that you understand that that's the nature of those foods. When I say there's no good or bad foods, the reason why is because when you actually vilify a food like that, you usually crave it and want it more. And that's really important. But if it's just a food that's completely within the food choices that you have to make every day, then you can actually discern. Now, that's a really good example that you said about the cake and going to the actual bakery or just making it yourself and then allowing yourself that food and feeling how it feels in your body versus this highly processed food. And you will feel a difference. You will feel like, I think what you get from the highly processed food is like this temporary high and then kind of a crash and then a wanting for more. When you really tune into your body doesn't want that. Your body loves to be full of energy. It loves to be anxiety-free, depression-free, crash-free, not needing tons of caffeine to then lift you up out of this, horrible after food malaise, right? So I think it's so important that we don't say, don't go eat that, but really discern how your body feels when you eat this. And I think, when we look at highly processed foods, this also includes a lot of diet foods. A lot of diet foods are highly processed, and they go through the same kind of, food science, chemistry lab. And that is designed so that you will go back and eat those foods, even if they're diet foods. So going closer to the ground, your body doesn't have that same reaction. So, for example, one of my clients loves pizza, and would when they were doing a binge, they would order the fastest fast food pizza out there. And so we worked together, and I was like, there's nothing wrong with pizza. Italians have been eating pizza forever. And you can go to Italy right now, and you won't gain a pound if you go eat that particular kind of pizza because of the way that it's made and the ingredients that it comes from. And usually because you're in Italy, you're like, yay, this is amazing. I'm eating pizza, and you're allowing yourself that and you're enjoying it, right? So why don't you go to a restaurant and order pizza and sit down with it and be with your pizza? And that was one of the main ways I got them to stop binging on pizza. Was that they would go and they would have it naturally. They would allow it. They would listen to their body. They'd be like, yeah, that feels really good. Oh, I think I'm done with that. No more binging. So I think it's really important. The main takeaway, if anybody could take away anything from this podcast, is you got to listen to your body, because your body tells you everything. It tells you when you're hungry. It tells you what it wants to eat. It gets really happy when the food is closer to the ground. If you eat slowly and mindfully enough, your body then tells you that moment when you're done eating. And if you honor that, then your body feels safe. And then it can go into the parasympathetic nervous system and digest your food. There's one other fun fact I want to leave you guys with too. Not that we're done, but one fact that I just recently learned that I think is super interesting. GLP-1, which, we have all of these weight loss medications that mimic GLP-1, which is a fullness hormone, essentially, in your body. It's made naturally in your body. It's made when you eat breakfast and when you eat starches. And I think that that is so fascinating, because if you look at diet culture, they're telling you, don't eat breakfast, intermittent fast, wait as long as possible to eat, and don't eat any starches. So there's so much that we have to disseminate from diet culture, but really, I think the answer lies in truly listening to your body. If you're hungry in the morning, please eat. Please eat and listen to what your body wants. And don't deny yourself starches, because then you're just depleting your GLP-1.
Wow. Yeah. It sounds like it's interesting to live in harmony with the body. It takes a lot of work, because I know a lot of people that have a lot of trauma. It's difficult to pay attention to your body. And I also think that there could be a lot of trauma around food, because you were talking about how we're demonizing certain foods. Like pizza it's not the problem. Cakes aren't the problem. It's kind of our relationship to them and how we're utilizing them, and maybe considering the source or the way that we're eating them. So you're getting into the nuances of how we behave and respond to things. I'm wondering about maybe like a story. Well, you did tell us about the pizza story, but I guess a story about maybe another person or yourself where something transformed based on kind of the methodology you utilize in the book, Deprogram Diet Culture.
Yes. Well, I have a lot of examples, client examples in my book. Of course, their names and identifying characteristics have been changed. And I think one really interesting one is a client in the book named Esperanza. And Esperanza came to the United States, was not from this country, and so grew up with immigrant parent, one parent, who basically, to no fault of her own, instilled a scarcity type of mindset in Esperanza, meaning this is what you're going to get right now, and you better eat it all, or you're not going to eat for days. And so that actual message from childhood set off a whole, slew of binging, because the idea was, we'll never, ever, ever see this food again, or there's never going to be enough with it. And it morphed in adulthood to being, I need to eat this much to be able to get through this stressor. And so that was the primary reason for the binging. And we did so much work in examining all of those thoughts from childhood, really looking at them, really discerning, lovingly, of course, where they came from their mother, because, they were trying to help her survive, but then realign them for reality, for today, for her as an adult. And she realized that she was living actually in abundance, and didn't need to be, hoarding away food or eating as much as possible in order to get through stressful events. So then she completely reformulated her relationship with food, and that completely stopped the binging. And the binging has been stopped now. I think we're going on about 1.5 years at this point. Just coming from a very, scarce mindset in childhood, and a real stressful and traumatic way of looking at sustaining the body. So when you really examine how you got here from A to Z, and you can determine what formulated a lot of your thinking, either about food, about yourself, about stress, about the world, you can reformulate them and completely and totally change your relationship with food for the rest of your life.
I love that. Wow. That's a very powerful story. And I do think that can happen. And I think that would be amazing because, I mean, health, I mean, we could get into, this is not really a topic, but like trying to have like a balanced and healthy diet can affect all sorts of things. Mental health. It's not just about weight and maybe feeling good in your body. Mental health can be affected. There's new studies looking at dementia patients and Alzheimer's and possibly diet's effect on that. Mm-hmm. Our diet, not dieting. What we eat and plenty of other things as well. I mean, affecting our sleep, things like that. So it's such a huge part of our life. Food, we have to eat to survive. And then it becomes a difficulty based on so many factors, your childhood, cultural things like that. So nutritional psychology, is this an emerging field, the marriage of psychology, physiology, and nutrition?
Yes.
Okay.
Strangely.
Yeah.
I will say this, when I did my master's first in nutrition and then moved on to get my doctorate in psychology. And when I was interviewing for my doctorate to go to the school, the person interviewing me is like, so why are you switching careers? Mm-hmm. I was like, what? It really struck me. I was like, well, I'm not. I'm completely adding on to my knowledge base. And I've always known that, what we eat has a direct effect. And this is, proven scientifically a million times over. But a lot of people have a disconnect between the mind and the body. And there really is no difference. They're all interconnected. You actually have, your gut brain, and you have your, actual cerebellum, right, in your brain. And they are interconnected. So direct information and nutrition comes from our gut, broken down by the bacteria in our gut, and it really does depend on the type of bacteria we have in our gut that determines so much of our health, mental health and physical health. So I look at all of these as intertwined. And yes, I mean, it's absolutely proven a million times over that the nutrition that we ingest has a direct relation to both our physical and our mental health. So the more that we can integrate that, nutrition especially, the better we can improve our mental health. So luckily, I think it's becoming more and more mainstream to be talking about nutritional psychology, but certainly in the past, they were considered completely different things.
Yeah, I've noticed that because as a therapist, our scope of practice does not include nutrition. So you had to kind of go outside and get a different degree, a nutrition degree, and be able to do that, to be able to give advice on diets. And oftentimes, I don't know if you've noticed this because we're close to wrapping time, but we have to, you see somebody for therapy and food is involved, and you want to work on, the things you talked about, like your childhood, about what was happening around food, cultural expectations, binging and purging, and these sort of things that you might be able to help with, talk therapy and EMDR and CBT and things like that. But then you have to send them elsewhere to a dietitian to kind of get on some sort of plan or whatever. And I wonder if you've noticed this, but sometimes in the nutrition field, there's a bit of this negative stuff you were talking about with the dietitians. Is that still something you notice?
Yes. And I will say, I've had to do much more continuing education outside of my master's program. And if you look, sadly, at the, I don't want to like bash them or anything, but the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, they're funded by a lot of, different corporations that may not have our, health at its heart, right? And so I received a lot of kind of dieting education in my nutritional science program. So yeah, there's like a huge disconnect even among some dietitians. And I think a lot of misinformation that is either, given to dietitians or promoted by dietitians, especially the ones who are, promoting more of this kind of diet mentality. I really wish that there were, as an overhaul in terms of the education that dietitians are getting in their master's programs, because if there wasn't this influence, then actual true science could be really promoted. But what what I saw in mine, and I'm not dissing my education at all. This is kind of categorical, is kind of the promotion of the status quo, and if the status quo actually worked, we would not see people who were struggling with being considered overweight or obese. If all of that were true, if everything that we learned and everything that's promoted by kind of older school dietitians or ones that may not have the up-to-date information, you would see a huge difference in people's health and people's weight. So that's what I'm hoping, is that, because nutritional psychology is, burgeoning, maybe we can, kind of help re-educate in certain other ways too, on the dietetics end.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to do. I was looking at the other day, there's this doctor that's promoting healthy eating, and he was talking about these foods are fine, but look at this name brand in the 70s and 80s what the ingredients was, and now look at the ingredients now.
Yeah.
So I think that maybe some of the old school nutrition was just like, well, ketchup is ketchup, a burger is a burger, French fries are French fries, which is actually not true, because they're constructed completely differently based on where they're processed and who cooks them and who makes them, right?
Yes.
If I go get tomatoes out of my garden and mash them up and add a little bit of sugar and salt to it and whatever else you do to make ketchup, that's far differently than getting it from some factory that did who knows what to it and put high fructose corn syrup in it and then made it shelf stable. So these things are different. And I think that I'm glad that you're out there kind of talking about not only what you've learned from your program, but also just practical information about how the world actually works, not just the textbook, which is, it's way more complicated. So I think this is great. This has been great talking to you. So you essentially, you have your online program, you have your book, you have your workbook, and then you have a private practice as well?
Yes. I'm in private practice in Los Angeles, California, and I'm also licensed in Colorado, Illinois, and now New York. So I can, run the gamut. I can also counsel people in nutrition, kind of anywhere. So yes, there's my practice website is drsupatratovar.com, which is drsupatratovar.com. I also have associates that are trained under me that are amazing. And then I have my other website, my educational website, which is anew-insight.com, anew-insight.com. And that's where you can find about the book. That's where you can take the course. You can contact me for speaking. I also have a podcast of my own. You can listen to that there. It's focused on, basically trying to empower people on their journey to optimal health. I have a wide variety of guests that I have on there. So you can listen there as well.
Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate you, Dr. Tovar, and I appreciate you coming on the show, and I'll have all those links in the show notes, and hopefully people will get excited and realize they can make a change.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me, Paul.
You're welcome.
Have it. This has been another episode of the Intentional Clinician podcast. If you are enjoying the show, please leave us a rating on iTunes or share the show with people you know. I would surely appreciate it. As some of you know, I am passionate about preventing future violence in the United States. I have started a nonprofit with colleagues called the National Violence Prevention Hotline, which is a 501c3 organization. We are endeavoring to gain funding and collaborators and volunteers so that we can start a 24/7 hotline and chat line to reach potential perpetrators before they may act violently. It is a bold effort to curb violence and save innocent lives by working to connect with potential offenders while they are in the planning stages of violence, help to de-escalate them, and provide resources so that they can get appropriate professional help. The National Violence Prevention Hotline is looking to open up a conversation about violence in society, the causes, and the solutions. You can learn more by visiting our website at violencepreventionhotline.org. You can get involved by writing your congressperson from our website, sharing it with your network, or even donating to the cause. If you are looking for an EMDR, International Association consultant, I am a consultant and I can help provide 20 hours that you need to become EMDRIA certified. Just check out the show notes and send me a message and see if we're a good fit to work together. If you are in need of counseling, do not hesitate to make an appointment with a local counselor in your area. You can also make an appointment with the excellent clinicians at Health for Life Counseling in Grand Rapids as part of the Trauma Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids by visiting www.healthforlifegr.com. And if you are in the state of Michigan, you can also schedule a telehealth appointment. The recording you just listened to consists of the personal opinions of Paul Krauss and his guest, and while these are based upon the literature they have read and the experience in their respective fields, the information on this podcast should not be viewed or thought of as the definitive opinion on any subject. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for treatment. If you're in a crisis, please call 911 or the National Crisis Line at 988. Support your local bookstore by shopping at bookshop.org. That's www.bookshop.org. It donates a percentage of sales to local bookstores all across the United States, which I think gives character to our cities and a place to hang out and a place to explore. You can order from the comfort of your own home online while supporting businesses near you. If you are a therapist and you are not involved in your local counseling or therapist or social work organization, please get involved to at least pay dues so that we can have lobbyists help keep mental health care accessible at the government level, and also expanding into schools and other places that need it. And also, if you didn't know, counseling organizations and professional organizations are working to keep us from becoming gig workers for a lot of large corporations who are coming in and trying to buy up local counseling agencies or basically pay you what they pay for people to deliver food to your house. So, get involved. Until next time on The Intentional Clinician, I wish you all a safe and peaceful week.